So, Phil, Nudge is the number one marketing podcast. You must hear all of the woes and problems that are keeping marketers up at night. I'm curious, what are you hearing most at the moment?
One of the most common things marketers say, and I'm sure you hear it as well at GWI, is that marketers seem to really struggle to understand consumer behavior. Why do consumers take one decision versus another? There's hundreds of anecdotes we could go into to describe this. One I really like is from Robert Cialdini's book, From Influence. And he wrote about this back in 1989 when he published the book. It's this great story from a reader. It's a reader who runs a turquoise jewelry store. And the reader writes into Cialdini, says, "Oh, this happened to me." And they're about to go on leave on holiday. They write a note for their sales assistant. They say, "Put all items at half price while I'm away. The stock's not selling out. We want to sell out the stock." The sales assistant reads this, misinterprets what the note says, assume it means double the price of every item in this store. So the sales assistant does so, doubles the price, goes away, stock sells out. So they doubled the price, did something which is totally against what the textbook would say, increased the price in the store, and suddenly more people bought. That's Robert Cialdini's example. There's plenty of others. Yuri Ganese in Mixed Signals, his book, he wrote about how a Californian winery increased their prices and saw a 50% increase in sales. And what that reveals is a very specific bias, human bias, called the Verbalin effect, which is this idea that if we increase prices and the product enhances wealth, signals status, that sort of thing, you can actually get more sales. Now, this is totally against conventional consumer behavior. We would assume that people are price elastic. You increase the prices, the demand goes down. And yet the opposite is true. This is a very specific example to describe something which I think happens across marketing. We think we understand consumers, and then they behave in a way which we think is either totally irrational or totally against what we might expect. There's a follow-up study, a really wonderful one from 2025 with eco products. Turns out eco products, it was a study with rucksacks, I think. Participants saw rucksacks. One was priced at $20, one was priced at $14. When it was priced at $20, people thought it was 7% better for the environment than the exact same rucksack priced at 14. So all these different examples, and it's in customers behaving in ways that we really don't expect. And I think what it shows is that to understand consumers, you've got to understand that not all consumers are the same, that there are real nuances. And I'm sure that's something you guys at GWI know.
Do you think that difficulty to understand consumers and their behavior and their contradictions is getting worse for marketers in the AI age? Because surely you would think they now have lots of information available to them. That should make it easier to understand their target consumers.
I think this is potentially the issue with AI. And it's that it's such an easy way to get information. If you ask AI, what should we do with our stock? It's not selling. What will it tell you? AI will look at the textbook and say, well, reduce the price. It will give you the rational answer. And the potential problem with AI, if you use it as a sort of blunt instrument for everything, is that you end up with very vanilla results, which won't drive much for your business. There's an interesting study, maybe debatable to talk about today, I'm not sure. It's a Swiss business school study with 666 participants. They got a bunch of participants to do critical thinking on a bunch of different tasks. So reading an article and critically think about that article. And half of them were asked to use AI, half of them were told not to use AI. And they measured the amount of critical thinking. How much did they actually analyze? How much did they really think about their own opinions? How much did they judge it? And they find that when you use AI, the amount of critical thinking used goes down. It's particularly prevalent amongst young people as well. I don't know if that's because young people are yet to develop critical thinking skills or if it's that they're too reliant on the technology. But what I think that tells us is that with AI, it's easy. We're tempted to go for it. We're tempted to use it all the time. And yet I think we need to remind ourselves that we still need to remain critical. We still need to think about how this applies to our own strategy. And perhaps we need to use it in more nuanced ways as well. It's not just as simple as asking a large language model for advice. I think you need more complex tools.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people forget that most AI tools are programmed to give you the most obvious, expected, predictable answer. That's what they deem as success. But the most obvious answer is not going to help marketers. I mean, I've seen people use it to try and understand Gen Z, and an AI tool will tell them, oh, Gen Z are all into TikTok and content creation. I knew that before I before I went into that tool. So it's really about the quality of the input that's going into it.
I've always imagined that AI probably has some confirmation bias in that it takes the information that you give it and tries to confirm it rather than trying to think critically about it and deny it. And so in that example of tell me about Gen Z, how are you guys developing tools to make sure that it's giving really objective, real analysis of what these audiences are like, rather than just confirming maybe what the marketer already believes?
Yeah, I mean, our fundamental belief is that an AI tool is only as good as the data that goes into it. And so if you're able to plug verified consumer data like GWIs and then know how to prompt it to maximum effect, that's kind of the magic combination. So one of the most common things I've been doing is picking an audience and asking the tool, tell me the unexpected or unusual things that I wouldn't imagine about this audience. And if you're a marketer or advertiser out there, it's that unexpected thing that I think will spark your best ideas.
Yeah, that's interesting. What's the unexpected thing? I've read, was it about Gen Z? I read that they hate beans on toast. Have you heard this? Gen Z, they like really dislike beans on toast. That's the unexpected thing about them. It's their one unique thing.
Interesting. I haven't seen that one. I have seen that they're not quite as woke, sober, and environmentally minded as you might stereotypically think. And that's a great example. You know, yes, we hear all the time that they're green activists and they're not drinking. And it's easy to take big assumptions like that and think that the entire generation is behaving that way, but actually start drilling into the data through an AI agent like ours, and all of that is fundamentally challenged. So, Phill, I've been told that you are a huge football, or should I say soccer fan. So as the World Cup is approaching, what do you think it means for the marketing and advertising world? What opportunities are there? How big do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, it's going to be a World Cup which is probably the most branded, marketed World Cup there's ever been. It's Trump's World Cup. He'll probably be handing out Bud Lights with the winners' medals or McDonald's burgers with the Man of the Match awards. But I think one of the things that I hear folks who listen to my show ask is why do companies bother spending such large amounts of money to advertise on these events? If you think of Coca-Cola, for example, we all know Coca-Cola. Why do they bother? I think it seems irrational if you think about it from that sense. We don't need to learn anything more about McDonald's, and yet they're spending 100 million to put their brand on the side of the football pitches during the games. And yet there's really good evidence when you try to unpack human behavior that these adverts have a really strong impact on us. And there's particularly a really wonderful study from 1989. It's a study from Duke and Stanford, a dual study. And they had 214 participants in the study. And they gave them information, sort of a 2-pager to read, about a brand new sneaker being produced. The information was identical for all 214 participants, except there was a variant. And the variant was that some people read that the company had spent $2 million advertising this new sneaker. Some people read that they had spent $10 million. Some people read that they had spent $20 million. Everything else was the same, everything about the product being sold. They then interviewed each of these participants after, and they asked them, what do you think about this sneaker? How high quality do you think it is? How well made do you think it is? All of these questions. And what you find is that small variable, the amount they had spent to advertise the sneakers, had an outweighed impact on the perceived quality. So those who thought the advertiser had spent $20 million promoting the sneaker said that the shoe was 14% better quality than those who thought it had just cost $2 million to promote it. And I think this plays into the marketers who are advertising at the World Cup and linking their brand with the World Cup. It's not just the fact that it's exposure. It's not just the fact that it's eyeballs. People intuitively know that it costs a lot of money to be at the World Cup, and that will have an impact on your brand. If Netflix advertise whatever, Stranger Things next series or their next series of Wednesday, not only will it encourage people to go and watch that show, it'll actually make them perceive that show as higher quality when they watch it because they know all the money that's been spent on promoting the show itself. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, and I don't think it changes how people will market at the World Cup, but I think it shows that we shouldn't undervalue those brands who are choosing to advertise there.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we recently ran a global project to understand who was planning to watch, how many of them across several different countries. And that confirms the audience is going to be vast. There will be so many eyeballs on that tournament. But what was really interesting is the different segments or tribes that came out. So there are the hardcore fans who will be watching live, as you might expect, but lots of other groups who may not be watching live. They may be watching clips and highlights via social, or who are actually more interested in the sort of cultural side of the World Cup rather than the games itself. So I think the lesson we've taken from that is there are lots of ancillary or adjacent opportunities to speak to people beyond the sort of in-game sponsorship moments.
Yeah, I think that data which you've shared tells me this is probably going to be the most second screened World Cup of all time. I think more people will be distracted, and that's also because what are they doing? They're doing more drinks breaks than ever before because of the heat. And in America, there's these lightning breaks. So if we want to make predictions, there's at the Club World Cup, there was all these breaks because there was a lightning strike within 30 minutes of the stadium or something. And then they all go off for 45 minutes and take a break. No one's going to stop watching the game there. They're just going to go on their phones. So it's probably a sign for brands and marketers that you don't just have to be advertising on the side of the pitch. If you're pushing your content at the right time on a second screen, you'll probably get a lot of awareness there as well.
Completely. And I think we've been used to thinking of the second screen as the TV being the main one and whatever you're holding in your hand being the second one. But actually, it could be reversed here. The phone that's in your hand is probably your main screen, and you may just glance up at what's going on the main one.
So I think most marketers are concerned about how marketing is changing. And it's changed a lot in the past 5 years. What skills do the marketers need now around insights and analysis that perhaps they didn't need 5 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it is a fundamentally transformational time. There's no question about it. And the skills that we need to do well in our jobs are changing and will continue to change. I think the advent of AI, it's a bit of a cliche to say it, but it's true. It can do a lot of the hard work for you, the time-consuming, mundane stuff. So if you were a researcher, you don't have to spend loads of time analyzing data, doing hardcore number runs. You can have all of that presented to you. If you're a marketer, some of the fundamental early steps can be done for you. And I've already seen great examples of agents that can build media plans and similar outputs. So I think the skill need moves from the sort of more basic early stage stuff to curation, refining, critiquing what's coming out of the tools that are supplying you with the first output. I think more than ever, marketers, researchers, insight professionals, you need to be able to scrutinize what you're looking at. Can you believe the results that are coming? Well, think about where the data has come from and what the AI tool is feeding from. And also, I think we need more skills development in just how to maximize usage of AI tools. Like if your company is not running training on how to do good prompting at the moment, it should be, because those are the skills that we'll be looking for. The human touch remains absolutely crucial, but the human is now critiquing, curating, deciding which outputs to bring together to tell that story.
You've mentioned it, but one of the things that I think was so important is when you ask AI for information, being able to go and check where they've got that information from and sourcing it and understanding it, because otherwise it's really hard to create a suggestion based on something where it's a bit opaque. It feels like something that GWI is probably quite conscious of and aware of, and is quite good at sourcing where these insights are from. Is that something you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, we've long been thinking about that, and it's staggering. And a lot of the mainstream tools out there, you can get results back and there's either no sourcing at all, or sometimes if you click on the source, it doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
Or other times it's sources that you probably wouldn't choose if you hadn't gone via an AI tool, press releases, outdated free reports from years ago, because a lot of AI tools, unless you've plugged data into them, they're just scraping what's available on the open web. And that would rarely be your first choice if you're a researcher or a marketer. So absolutely check the sourcing. And at GWI, that's what we've invested a lot of time into. Any insight that's coming out of our agent is fully referenced, and with just one click, you can go into our platform and scrutinize that data yourself and start manipulating it in any way you want to.
We've seen consumer research change pretty dramatically over the past couple of decades. It's going to change even more with the sort of adoption of AI and the progression of those AI technologies, how do you think it will change in the next 5 years?
It's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball that could give the clear, definitive answer. I think there are some predictable roads we'll continue traveling down. So if you think about how research is collected and processed, all of that's going to get so much more automated and efficient and probably need less human inputs. If you think about the different data sources you currently might choose to use, often they can be quite siloed. You might have to go into different platforms with different data sets. With AI now, it's so much easier to bring all of those together and do coherent analysis across them. So I think as we move forward, the levels of comfort and skill with analyzing multiple data sources together will improve. The big area that's still a bit unknown for me is synthetic data. There's no question that it has a big role to play, but how quickly we can get to results that are reliable, accurate, trustworthy, for me at least, the jury is out. We've done extensive testing at GWI, and so far we just haven't been convinced that the quality and the reliability is there. That will get better, and it will get better quickly, but it worries me at the moment that people are relying on synthetic outputs when, if you dig beneath the surface, it's a bit of a black box, and the reliability, certainly outside of mainstream audiences, is questionable. But look, there will be lots of innovation there, and in 5 years' time, I think we'll be much more comfortable with the idea of data that is a combination of real human responses, that human truth that continues to ground it, but then synthetically created additions to that. And actually, I speak to senior data folks week in, week out, and I think the vast majority of them are comfortable with that as long as transparency is maintained. I think the researcher always wants to be able to see what came from real human respondents and what have we synthetically inferred and added into that. So as long as there's a kind of magic button that allows you to see the two, I think that's where we're heading.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is there, when you spoke to me about combining these different data sources, I started to imagine, what would that look like? What insight could you get? Is there an example that comes to mind of when you combine multiple different data sources and you can use AI to really aggregate them in a way that you never could? What insights can you get from that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been playing about with that a lot at GWI, and there's so many possibilities. So within our own agent, you could introduce sales data from a brand and then combine that with consumer attitudes and ask for an analyst report to be created. You can ask it to look at news stories and then mine consumer data to think, how are consumers likely to respond to that? You can ask it to consider brand partnerships. So all of that external data can be brought in. And at GWI, the strongest part of our data has always been the attitudes, the psychographics, the why people are doing things. What really excites me is the ability to bring in things like media ratings or credit card data, the stuff that there's no value in asking consumers to self-report that, because you can just bring in the factual passive, the collected data. And so that combination of the consumer's motivations, beliefs, and attitudes with all of that observed data, I think the possibilities there are endless. At GWI, we recently ran some original research among marketers and advertisers in the US to understand what tools they were using, how they're feeling about AI, and really when they need to make a decision, what's their go-to source. Some surprising stuff came out of that. So everyone sees the value of consumer insights, but actually less than 50% of decisions at the moment are being supported by consumer insights. So we have this strange sort of paradox that generally our industry sees the value of bringing in the consumer's point of view, but more often than not, we're not actually doing it. Why do you think people might not be making decisions and arming themselves with consumer insights?
It's fascinating. I think it's two things. One of them, Rory Sutherland talks about a lot, so Vice Chairman at Ogilvy. And he talks about how it's a great point. As marketers and people working on brand creatives, we have to prove our ideas to the accounting function, to the finance team. We have to give them an ROI. on why we should do a World Cup ad or a Super Bowl ad or a social spend, whatever it is. We have to prove our ROI. So everything we do in terms of the marketing function is framed through a financial output. What could we bring back to the organization? Interestingly, it's never done the other way around. So when the finance team has a problem, they don't go, oh, let's ask the marketing team for some creative solutions here. It's always framed that way around. And it has meant that as a marketing function over the past 50 odd years, we've become obsessed with proving our worth. And it means that we opt for platforms which can prove our worth really quickly. So social ads is a classic example. It means we're far more interested in short-termism over long-termism. So a great example of this is Dyson came up with the line, it took 5,127 prototypes to create the first Dyson vacuum. Incredible line. Potentially has made Dyson sales for decades. You could say Heinz doing beans means Heinz. One of these incredible distinctive lines that sticks with us. A marketer can only put that against their target for 1 year. They can only say, oh, we've increased sales for this year because we ran this campaign then. You don't get the longitudinal data. You can't, as a marketer, be like, yeah, well, I ran that campaign 10 years ago and people still think about Dyson in such high regards because of that campaign 10 years ago. So you're constantly having to prove your short-term worth. And I think all of that means is that we have far less time than we expect to go and get consumer insight, to go and really understand consumer insight. We instead look for financial data instead and say, oh, we think we can get the ROI. We think we can get our cost per click down. We think we can get more impressions, rather than thinking, what are the consumers really interested in? What will encourage them to buy? What will change their decisions? I think that's one really important reason. I think another one as well is that really, we as marketers, we're overworked. CMOs famously have the shortest lifespan. And again, that probably leads into that short-termism as well. But yeah, I think it more or less comes back down to this idea that as marketers, we have to prove the financial viability of our decisions, not the creative viability.
I think you're spot on. And in fact, in that same research, we could really see the impact of people being time poor. So number one thing that people go to when they need to make a decision is their gut feeling, their experience, which nothing wrong with that, but you need something to verify it and back it up with. Number two was internal data, which of course can be valuable, but risks sort of self-perpetuating your own point of view. It can be a bit of an echo chamber. And number three, AI tools. So what our sort of big argument is that it's actually consumer insights feeding into AI tools that are the magic solution. We know that people are time poor. They need to make decisions quickly. They can't wait about. And traditionally, that has been a problem for consumer insights. They've been perceived as too slow, too siloed, living off in different platforms. But if they can be integrated into the AI tools that the marketing industry is already using, we think that's the sweet spot that will help that robust, neutral data start flowing into decisions and enriching the choices that people are making. Because we're still going to use our intuition. We're still going to draw on personal experience, but actually being able to verify that and back that up with consumer data, that's what we're pushing towards.
Yeah. And I imagine one of maybe the problems that you guys have is that customer insights they're not going to ever be foolproof. We live in a chaotic world. There are thousands of variables which affect if a business performs well or poorly. What customer insights, I imagine, gives you is an edge. It puts you above a gut instinct. It puts you above the baseline, but it's not black and white. It's not going to say, oh, if you target Gen Z before they've had their cup of coffee in the morning, that they will purchase more. It's not as black and white as that. There's too many variables. And an insight that's right today might not be right tomorrow because things change. And I think you have to prove that point to customers sometimes, don't you? That these insights are ever changing. You need to constantly be analysing them to understand that. Is that right?
Oh, completely. Yeah. People are very changeable. They are not consistent. They contradict themselves all the time. And as real world events are happening, views change. We move on. So understanding how people are feeling constantly is really important. And sort of looking through consumer data and finding that unexpected, surprising insight, that's what can spark the idea that will drive you to success.
The research role keeps changing. I think it's going to continue to change. It's a bit of a theme today in terms of how things are changing. But thinking specifically about researchers, how does their role change when they start to adopt AI?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And research is one of the many professions that has been looking over its shoulder, slightly nervously thinking, what's my role in the new AI era? At GWI, we fundamentally believe the importance of research, and the researchers conducting it will only get bigger and bigger. The exact jobs that researchers are doing should change, will change. And it's that classic line of some of the more time-consuming, mundane top jobs that you've spent your time on previously. There will be tools that can do a lot of that legwork for you. So the good news is you will have more time to do the fun, creative, thought-provoking stuff that always gets pushed to the bottom of the list because you're trying to, get the basics done. So I think research, if you're a researcher, it's less about programming surveys and writing questions. It becomes much more about taking the initial outputs that are coming from AI tools and adding that human touch into them, making that research stand out, making it unique, really thinking about how we're going to help clients get those surprising, unexpected insights that they're looking for. So research, if anything, is elevated by AI because you need that human input to make it special, different. You need to sort of critique and judge the initial outputs that you're receiving and think, are these going to deliver insights for our clients?
Yeah, that human element. You spoke a bit about intuition before as well. It reminds me, there's these wonderful studies by a German researcher called Gerd Gigerenzer, really famous researcher, done heaps of studies. His sort of seminal one was this fascinating study. He got basketball players, student basketball players, 72 of them, to watch a basketball play and paused the match just as the player was about to make a decision on what to do. Do they pass? Do they keep dribbling? Do they shoot for a three-pointer? For half of the 72 students, he asks them to make a decision about what the player should do straight away. Don't think about it. Pause. What should they do? Oh, they should shoot for a three-pointer. For another half, he says, pause for 10 seconds, think about what the player should do, and then make a decision. So they pause and they think, okay, oh, there's a guy over there, I'll pass to him. Intuitively, we believe if they have 10 seconds more to think about it, they'll make a better decision. What Gert found, that's not true. In fact, these players made better decisions when they were asked immediately, when they used their intuition, rather than when they waited. And you could say, okay, well, how are you measuring quality of decision if you're just watching it? This was his first study. He then did a separate one, which I think is even more interesting, continuing the analysis, and he did it with semi-professional golfers. He gets the golfers onto a putting green, and they're setting up to take their putts. They all take sort of equal distant putts, and they measure their baseline to a control so you can get a variable and understand the differences. For one group, he says, take the putt instantly. Don't think about it. For another group, he says, stand there, do your practice swings, and then take 5 seconds to really prepare. And he finds the same thing. The expert golfers who act on intuition, who don't take time to think, get the ball closer to the hole on average than those who don't take as much time. Now, why I think this is relevant to the role of researchers today and why I think it's important is not don't do any research and do everything on intuition. I think it's the opposite. I think AI gives you the ability to do the hard work for you. And it means if you have an idea on a Tuesday afternoon and you can act on intuition. You don't have to just put it in a paper pile and think, oh, I might get to that next month. Because you've got tools which can help you do heavy lifting for you, you can go and research how Gen Z might react to this latest campaign, how a different group might think about my competitor in this way. You'll be able to act on intuition more. And I actually think that's something researchers have not had the ability to do for so long because it's taken so much work. I think AI might open them up to this.
I love that. I mean, there are so many time-consuming parts of research which you can now outsource effectively. And it's such a cliche, but it really is true. AI won't take your job as a researcher, but a researcher who knows how to capitalize on AI will take your job. So embrace it and start thinking about the ways that it can make your job better. I'm really curious to know, what is the best insight you've heard or discovered recently?
Yeah, I love this question. And I've got an answer which I think is interesting because it's maybe counter to what we've been talking about with AI. So when we think about AI, we think about, it saves us loads of time. It's a silver bullet and get to the point very quickly. A really interesting insight that I've sort of become fascinated in with the world of behavioral sciences, studies by Ryan Buell from Harvard University. He's done a lot of studies into something called operational transparency. In the studies, really interesting, goes into Harvard canteen and he does these A/B tests. The canteen sells sandwiches, like a typical Subway store. Just imagine that, basically. Half of the people who go into the canteen see the chef preparing the sandwich for them. So they see the work going into their product. The other half don't see it. So the chef is put behind an opaque glass. Individuals buy their sandwich. They're then asked afterward, how do you rate the quality of the sandwich? Do you think it was a fair price? Is there anything you could see to improve? And what Ryan Buell finds consistently is that people prefer the quality of the product when they can see the work that has gone into it, when they can see the chef making the food. And I think this is really interesting and something really important to keep in mind when you think about AI, because there is this pressure perhaps as marketers and researchers to give the role of research away to AI completely and say, oh, well, we don't even need to think about this. Or with a marketing campaign, Coca-Cola famously this year for their Christmas ad created a totally AI-generated campaign. And the reaction to that from consumers is really hatred. They don't like it, even though the campaign's quite good. And the reason I think is because people value when they see effort going into something. And I think it's really important as researchers and marketers to actually remember in this world of silver bullets and quick fixes that putting effort into something, whether it be a marketing campaign or a research project, will change the perception people have of that marketing campaign or research project. So that's my big insight. I'm going to throw the question back on you, Jason. What would yours be?
I think I've got two, actually. The first, we were talking earlier about sort of unexpected or surprising insights, and this is kind of related to that. So we have spent quite a lot of time asking various AI tools out there to visualize what it thinks certain audiences look like. And then we've done the same once our data is plugged into the mix. And my favorite example that's come out of that was we asked it to visualize what it thinks the typical country music fan in the US looks like. Mm-hmm. One of the mainstream tools out there. Yeah. And up pops this image of a middle-aged white man in a denim jacket and a cowboy hat standing in front of a farm in one of the US states that you can imagine.
Leaning on his pickup truck.
Yeah, the most stereotypical image you could possibly think of. Then we asked it to do the same, but after we'd plugged GWI's data into it. Yeah. Exactly the same question wording. What now appears is a suburban woman in her early to mid 30s who likes gardening, who is into Pinterest, because that is what the data shows you is actually the typical country music fan in the US. It's a majority female audience for a start. So it's that ability to challenge preconceptions. And what I particularly have enjoyed is as you use AI tools, you start to notice that they generate images with the same physiognomy of people. So the number of times the same middle-aged straight white man pops up as your typical audience, literally the same one, like the same face in context after context after context, it really underlines how important it is to get the right data if you want the strongest insights. And kind of related to that, in the research we did among marketers in the US, we asked people before and after they started using consumer insights in AI tools, what they expected the benefits to be. And the top answers remain the same before and after. So, it allows you to be quicker, it makes you more productive, the things that you would expect. Yeah. But where people who had adopted it really over-indexed and stood apart was in finding unexpected insights and having better alignment across their teams, because all of their teams are getting consistent, reliable insights into the decision-making processes that they're involved in. That is just, to me, a great example of why the data going into your AI tool is so critical for the quality of insights that you'll get out.
I love that one so much. And I think what people need to remember with the insights that you guys can provide is that they can have an asymmetric benefit. So it might just take a few hours and a fairly small cost to figure out that it's middle-aged women doing gardening that love country music. But for a promoter, and I guarantee I bet no country music promoter is doing this right now. A country music promoter probably spending a huge amount of money advertising in Harley Davidson Weekly, competing with every other country band on there, probably getting a really small return, could, with this insight, totally change their strategy, suddenly start promoting the album in Gardeners Weekly, see a huge return on investment for something which is a relatively small insight. And I think that's what's really exciting about these insights, is you can have an asymmetric return if you find a good one.
I totally agree that the campaigns you would plan for those two images are so wildly fundamentally different. It's untrue.